Hi, this is your host Abdul Bhartiya, and we are here at Open Source Summit in Seattle. And today we have with us once again Clyde Seepersad, SVP and GM of Training and Certification at Linux Foundation.
That's
Clyde,
right.
it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me back, Swapnil.
It's my pleasure. Just give us an update. What's new happening in your division?
We released our 2024 Tech Talent Report. This is something that we've been doing for over 10 years, and we're trying to provide a snapshot of what's happening in the industry, what's happening in terms of the trend when it comes to technical talent, and how is that shifting in a world where, for the last several years, people have been trying to think about cloud and cloud talent and how are we getting organized to make sure that that organizations are able to take advantage of that. And on top of that now, of course, Gen AI, right? And so everybody's trying to figure out what is that going to look like from a talent perspective, from a product perspective, from a risk perspective. And after this, it'll be something else, right? Because what's true, I think, across tech is waves of new technology keep coming out. And as a technologist, it was true back in the day that you could have built a full career on being a certain type of network switch person or a certain type of database person. I think that world doesn't exist anymore, right? You cannot say, I'm going to do this thing, specialize, and I'll run my whole career on it. And so there's this imperative of needing to develop new skills as the landscape changes, which gets back to when you think about technical talent, like what is the state of play? What's heating up, what's cooling down, how are organizations going to react, how are people going to react. So we'll have to spend some time just kind of talking you through some of the highlights of what we found.
I will talk about the highlights of this report, but from your perspective in these last 10 years, what kind of major shift you have seen when it comes to talent?
So I think the big one is more organizations being actively involved with technology. And so, 10 years ago, you would have been able to identify the so-called tech companies, and you'd think, okay, these are the folks who are going to be investing from a product perspective, from a services perspective. I think when you look across industry today, we have a whole slew of projects happening, for instance, just in financial services, right, which a lot of people think of as a heavily regulated, risk-averse type industry. And I think it's a great example of where the promise of technology has kind of moved beyond what you think of as sort of technical technology IT companies into the mainstream, right? So you have car companies very involved, you have healthcare companies very involved, you have industrial goods companies very involved, you have energy companies very involved. And so the footprint and the impact of how can we use this in our business, I think has really kind of fundamentally changed. You hear this sort of saying, and it's true that every company is now a tech company. Well, if you look at most organizations, I would challenge you to find a major sector of the economy where there is not a substantial amount of interest, R&D, product development around how technology fits alongside their mission.
Interestingly, the most of the when it comes to software and hardware, open source is becoming a big chunk there. So we can also say that we live in an open source driven world.
We do. Well, 3 years ago, we used to call this report the open source jobs report. And we stood back and we said, we're doing the audience a disservice because fundamentally, it's just the tech report, because these technologies, it happens that they're collaboratively developed and they're licensed under open source licenses, but it's just the way that software gets written anymore, especially at the foundational level, right? And so I think from a big picture perspective, whether or not you try to label something as open source or not, this is how software gets written. In a GitHub DevOps type world, it gets written collaboratively. And you see that in terms of the breadth of acceptance by companies saying, hey, I want in because now I get to go in and influence and be part of that movement. And you certainly see that in terms of when you look at developers and engineers coming up and you inquire about what skills they're looking to learn, they're looking to mostly learn the skills that are collaboratively developed, open source license as the foundation. Now, you still end up with productized versions that you pay for, right? And so there's a layer of GUI management on the public cloud, right? That sits on top of, well, it sits on top of what is fundamentally a collaboratively developed set of technology stacks.
Right. I remember a couple of years ago, I saw Sam Ramji, and he was like, he used to head Cloud Foundry,
Yeah.
and he said, in 5 to 6 years from now, we won't even use the term open source,
Right.
because it will become, that's the way we develop
It's just
software.
how we develop software.
So, and when I listen to you, I'm like, look, you just never know.
I've been trying to use the language of collaboratively develop, because that's really what we see out here, right? Is people coming together to solve problems, sometimes long-standing business problems, and they're doing that collaboratively, even though in their day jobs, their organizations are competing because they realize that everybody is better off if we solve these things at the root level.
Yeah, so very true. And I feel open source is less about code and more the collaboration is the biggest problem. Code is you can sit in your room and write code as much as you like, but collaboration, that is the real challenge. And that's where organizations like Linux Foundation bring. I mean, look at the vendor. These vendors, they compete in the market, but their developers come together and work on all these open source projects that are sometimes hosted within Linux Foundation. So it's a very good collaborative model there.
What's happened in the past decade in particular is a appreciation for the fact that the only way to solve the really big challenges is to bring a lot of people together to work on it. And yes, it's possible to do that within a single technical organization, but wow, it's a lot easier to just collaborate.
It doesn't even need one to be a rocket scientist or genius to see how easily you can solve your problem when you get people from different parts.
I think what you've seen time and time again the last decade or two is broad collaboration yields great results. And that means by country, that means by gender, that means by age cohort. Get more voices to the table. And what happens then is, and the way these collaboratively developed projects work, all the ideas go up the funnel. The best ideas make it into the merge, right? And so get as many good ideas as possible, and then let the system sort of vet them out, because you never know where the next great insight is going to come from, where the next really creative way of solving a problem is going to come from. It's not a zero-sum game to invite more people to the party, right? I think that's fundamentally the lesson that we've been learning and we keep learning is the more people passionate, contributing, making their voices heard is a good thing, because you get more breadth of coverage, you get more interesting, innovative ways of viewing problems, you get more generalizable solutions coming out of it. And it's not a zero-sum game, right? Because everybody can participate, and you can participate in an area of focus that is you're passionate about without having to be a generalist across the whole project, right? And so it allows people to confidently contribute and participate without having to necessarily be a deep expert across the whole spectrum of the space.
Very well said, very well said. We talked about a broader picture. Now I want to scale back and look at this recent, survey. I'm pretty sure that there'll be some repetition of the things that we talked about in the findings, but I want to hear some of the highlights of this one.
Let's start at the top level. If you read anything in the popular press in the first half of 2023, you would have thought that employment in the tech sector was collapsing, because for many months on end, every single headline was layoffs at X, layoffs at Y, layoffs at Z. One of the things we point out in the report, and this was from our Boston Consulting Group survey, is 90% of people found jobs quickly and actually reported that they found a better job, because there was actually still a lot of latent demand for technical talent. And in the report, what we saw is that despite all the what seemed to be the dominant narrative in the press, only 30% of respondents replied that their organization had reduced net headcount. And so if you say, well, it's 1 in 3 companies, that's a very different picture than I think what you would have taken away from reading the press this time last year. And so there was not, in fact, this giant retrenchment in the tech sector. There was a reallocation, probably on average, away from the bigger companies into the medium-sized and smaller companies. And that's not a bad thing, right? Because those companies were really starved for talent. So at a big picture, still a great place to have a career. And the next question now, people who worry say, well, what is Gen AI going to do? Because is that going to be the thing that drives employment down? And what we saw in the survey is there are some companies, about a quarter of them, saying that they think they will reduce their headcount because of Gen AI investments. But there were just as many companies that said they were going to increase their headcount because they were going to start investing in technology around the space. And so, yeah, what we've seen, and this was true when the cloud came out, right? And you had this idea that, wow, if one person can manage 100,000 servers, what do I need engineers for? Well, turns out you need more people using it. So I think the concern about is technology going to replace people, time and again we've seen is not true. People adapt, they move into different skill sets. So I think the big picture is I would still be bullish on a tech career for my kids as a really fulfilling way to work. But then more specifically, this broad, I think, understanding, we keep saying talent is something you should build and not just buy. And I think for a long time, there was this default setting in people's heads that if you wanted to get into cybersecurity, if you wanted to get into cloud native, if you wanted to get into AI, that the way to do that would be to hire. Like you'd have to go out into the market and find people and bring those skills inside. I think what we see, and in the survey, we got data that said that a half of organizations are making significant investments in upskilling and cross-skilling their existing employees because of our recognition, one, that you can't hire your way to success because in aggregate, there's still not enough technical talent that's out there. But secondly, because the only way that you're going to get your existing workflows migrated to a microservice or a future-proof stack is by using your existing employees, right? It's magical thinking to think that your 20-year-old hypervisor-driven piece of software, which is running your enterprise today, is somehow magically going to spontaneously combust and turn into a microservice. Or that somebody who you hired new off of LinkedIn could come in and replicate those as microservices. When in fact, the only people who know how the code works today are already in your organization, right? And so how are you going to take those folks who built their career in a monolithic waterfall type world and give them an opportunity to develop these new skills? And oh, by the way, become the pathway to which your legacy workloads gets migrated, right? And so I think there's a new appreciation bubbling for, we have plenty of technical talent. They may not have particular skills in DevOps, CI/CD pipelines, cybersecurity, microservice development, but there's no reason they couldn't build those skills if we help them and we invest in them to do that. And the benefit it provides is business continuity, right? Because I think there's a lot of underappreciated risk about what happens to these 20, 25, 30-year-old systems, which are working fine today. But every year we wait, more people retire, more people move away, there's less depth to support the organization. And so this idea of recognizing the assets of the people that you already have that work on what you might think of as unsexy legacy technologies, that they're an asset, and that they're an asset that you can basically upskill so that they're continue to be valuable to you today running the existing infrastructure, but that they can be valuable to you 2 years from now, 5 years from now, as you migrate that stuff to a more modern computing environment.
I was listening to NVIDIA's CEO earlier. He said, founder and CEO, that, you don't even need to know coding because Gen AI, LLMs will take care of it, AI. But the fact is that, no, you will need, Kelsey said, actually, you will need more coders, human coders, because the garbage that will be created, you have no idea. And then later he said that AI is not going to take your job. The guy who knows AI is going to take your job. So as the market evolves, we will reach a point where no, we still need, developers. AI can do a lot of things. Good example is Photoshop. Photoshop has not eliminated the jobs of photographer. It actually enabled more people, even people like me, to create a good piece of art because it's a good tool. Itself is not an artist, so AI will not be an artist in itself. It will be a tool, but it depends. We'll see where the industry goes.
I think that's been the big lesson learned on the people side this past decade is that people are not static technical assets, and that you can And you should expect your people to grow and develop new skills, just like you do on the cloud native side, right? And so they start running Kubernetes and containerized workloads, and then they figure out they need monitoring and logging and telemetry, and then they keep adding stuff to their skill mix, right? I think there's this idea of technical folks as being on a continuous career journey of discovery and additional skills and diversifying their skill set to match what the company actually needs, but thinking of that talent, technical talent, as a dynamic set of skills rather than a point in time, something that you hire for.
Either from the employee's perspective or from the employer's perspective, how important is retention in today's world where people are switching jobs so frequently?
Well, one of the things that the old mindset, I think, was that if you train people on modern technical skills, that the result would be that they would leave and they would go get a better job somewhere else. I think what you're seeing is a realization that people are loyal. Most people are loyal, and if you give them an opportunity to develop a set of skills that they didn't have, they probably are just as likely to stick with you and be able to prove those skills out and sort of grow up into that technical path. So this willingness to continue to invest from an organization perspective, which was a lot of the resistance. I think if I think back 5 years ago, there was a lot of resistance to, but if I train them up, then they will just go get a better job down the street. And I think people are realizing that that's not how human nature works, right? And that the people you select for these programs are going to be people who have been committed employees, who are part of the social fabric of your organization. And you know what? It's so much more cost effective to upskill an existing person than it is to spend $40,000 on a recruiter. And so with people who are worried, I tell them, look, well, you know what? Train 3 people if you're worried that somebody's going to leave, because worst case scenario, maybe 2 of the 3 left. You're going to end up with 1, and that's still going to be cheaper than you spending $40,000 on a headhunter. And in the survey, the average time to hire somebody and train them for onboarding was over 10 months. So almost a year. And so this thinking of, I'll just hire somebody because training somebody takes too long. Well, if it takes 10 months to find the person, onboard them, train them, and make them productive, and by the way, almost 40% of those people are then gone within 12 months. Even if you said it was going to take you 9 months to train your existing person into this new way of working, it's not slower, right? And I think that's part of what people are seeing, right? This idea that, well, I can hire somebody tomorrow. Well, no, you can't. It takes you 5 or 6 months to find somebody, another 4 or 5 months to train them. And so be realistic and recognize that external hiring is not a short-term fix. And so now you're comparing apples with apples, and you're thinking about what's the internal hiring going to take in terms of finding somebody, getting them on board, versus what is it going to take to cross-train and upskill the person I already have. That starts being a much more compelling business case in terms of timing as well as cost.
More and more talent is being released because companies are doing a lot of layoff. Is it bridging the skill gap that demand and supply? We used to talk about that, or you feel that no, there is enough talent in the market, so companies are at least not feeling a pressure to fill that skill gap or talent gap, or you feel that through the survey you realize that companies still don't get the people they need for the job, which is slowing them down, they are not innovative?
I think what on average, there was a reallocation of people towards smaller organizations as part of that refactoring that happened last year. When you talk to those organizations, the large organizations are back into growth mode. They're trying to figure out Gen AI and all this stuff, right? But when you talk to the mid-sized organizations, right, 1,000, 2,000 people organizations, now that they have access to some technical talent, their appetite has actually gone up, right? And so they were so starved that they didn't have enough, and they couldn't compete with the stock options and the salaries. Now that they have technical talent, their appetite has grown, right? And so it wasn't a one-time static solution that says, okay, well, we moved the people down to these new places and now everybody's happy. time and time again, we've seen this, is when technology becomes accessible to new industries or new segments of markets, the appetite for it grows and grows and grows. And the implication is the appetite for technical skills grows and grows and grows. And so I think it helped a lot. It helped a lot of organizations that had really been struggling to get a foothold. But now they see the promise of it and they want more, right? And so now, and when we have conversations with them, we're saying, okay, how can you grow some more talent? Talent is something that you should build, not just buy. And don't you already have people that you can cross-skill? Now that you have some people with skills from outside the organization to act as reference points. So I think it's just a maturity and a growing up and a recognition that going outside to hire isn't the only path available to you as your appetite for these technologies grows.
Are there any specific skills that you feel are most sought after or hard to find?
Yeah, I mean, look, no surprise here, right? The big three are cloud native stuff, cybersecurity, and machine learning AI. That's what is on people's mind. They're trying to think about, how am I balancing these things? And so anytime I talk to a technologist, especially folks who are younger in their career, I say, look, read the news. AI, cybersecurity, cloud and microservices, right? Those are the core components of what for the foreseeable future you're going to be wanting to work on in any tech stack. I don't care what size organization or what industry organization you're in.
When companies, they look at the, these skills, talents, other than the person knows what they're doing, what is the role of training and certification in that? How important is that?
Yeah, I think this has been part of as people have gotten more exposure to what it looks like to develop talent, this appreciation that, look, if you speak to 100 hiring managers, 100 of them would tell you that their first preference is to hire somebody who's been doing exactly what we're doing at some other organization. The reality is you're never going to find that person, or you're never going to find enough of that person. So yes, it's true that that's your first preference, but given that it's not realistic, what is your next best preference? And I think that's where we're starting to see people say, well, okay, what I really would prefer is to hire somebody that has this magical mix of experience that exactly matches what I want to do. But since there probably aren't that enough people and I probably couldn't find them anyway, what's the next best thing? The next best thing is to show me that you have demonstrated skills in this area. And that's where traditionally you would say, show me that you have a degree. And what we see here in the survey results is that almost by 2-to-1, people are saying, no, I actually care more about, can you show me a high performance certification credential versus a degree, because I have a higher belief that the right certifications are going to be a signal of your hands-on capabilities in doing this work than my belief system around. And this is part of the big, I think, trend that's happening across tech in terms of not being as hung up on kind of college degree credentialing, right? So the maturity of realizing that, yes, I know you would prefer to hire basically your own self from 5 years ago, but given that that's not a realistic option, what are your next best options to get these seats filled? And so cross-training existing people, absolutely very high on the agenda. If that alone can't get you what you need for, using things like certifications, which are more real-time, point-in-time, technology-specific ways to get confidence that this person actually has the skill sets that you're looking for, is something that we're seeing represented in the data set as, if not people's first choice, their practical second choice for how am I going to vet the talent. If I have to go outside my organization, what am I going to look for as proof points?
Clyde, thank you so much for taking time out today. First of all, thanks for walking us through this latest, the findings of the report. And also, I really love the broader picture that you painted where we are today, what kind of talents folks need. And the most important thing is that it's easier and more cost-effective to train existing folks. And I really love when you say people are still loyal. We actually in modern world forget about that. But I think these are the views we need to reinforce. So thanks for sharing all those great views, and I would love to chat with you again. Thank you.
So I always appreciate the opportunity to come on and get in front of your audience and kind of share some of our thinking.